I'm Matt Dept. I work at the Iowa Cattlemen's Association and have been there for going on 7 years. And certainly when we talk about animal disease traceability and a state like Iowa that has so many diverse interests from a livestock perspective and some interesting current history, very hot topic amongst our 10,000 members in the Cattlemen's Association, as well as other commodity trade associations as well. Today, like Terry mentioned, I'll be moderating Making ADT a Reality. So by the time we're done, we're going to have everything figured out, right? Okay, there's a few giggles still in the crowd, so hopefully that'll work out. But just like before, I just encourage everyone to ask questions, to give input. I think this is a collective opportunity to really do some solid thinking, so at the end of the day, we can kind of start focusing in on some common things that we all heard, some common ways to potentially work forward. I'm not going to go through and go through the bios again, just like the previous moderator. But really, as you look down, the folks that are going to speak on this session, lots of different interests from different states, from different industry connections moving forward here. So without further ado, and just from a time sensitivity standpoint, I'm going to call Mr. Tim Starks up, who will be our first speaker here for this panel, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
This is mine. Very good. Well, good afternoon. I appreciate being part of this forum and being included. I want to start with an apology. I know it's been a long day already, and we've hashed and rehashed some of these topics. But I'm going to go back over some of them again, and I'm going to do that because the Livestock Marketing Association represents about 800 livestock markets and members, and we put a great deal of time and effort into identifying the concerns that our markets have about an ADT program, and we compiled that list because we think it's very important. And so as we start through this, you'll see that we've addressed a lot of these issues before. But I want to make sure that everybody in the room understands that the livestock markets who we believe have a very important role in carrying out any kind of an animal disease traceability program that might exist, that their voices are heard. I want to talk just a little bit about my background so you understand a little bit of where my perspective comes from. Got in the cattle business as a producer, farm kid, born and raised in northern Oklahoma, running stocker cattle when I was in 8th grade. My dad was letting me go borrow money and run a few cattle on wheat. Left the farm, went to Oklahoma State University, got a degree in ag econ and veterinary medicine. Came back, opened a practice 2 miles from the market in Cherokee, Oklahoma. Became the Selborne veterinarian. Held that role for about 7 years. Then retired from veterinary practice for a short time. Sold my practice to a classmate who is still the market veterinarian. 3 or 4 months later, got the opportunity to purchase that market. And so for the past 19 years, I've been the owner of a livestock market. And then in July of this year, got the opportunity to get out of that trap. Had somebody who was willing to pay me for the market. And somebody this morning mentioned that they were 60 and got their first paycheck. And I got mine 2 months ago. I'm 50 years old, and I'm drawing a check now. I'm working for the livestock market. I'm still doing veterinary work. I'm licensed in Kansas and Oklahoma. I do a fair amount of regulatory work. Unfortunately, I got introduced to VFDs and these ICVIs and all that good stuff, and not because I want to or because I want to use it as a source of income. Quite honestly, out of a need. I mean, we laugh and joke a little bit about having enough veterinarians out in the country to take care of animal agriculture, but folks, it's a real issue, and we are short. So by default, I get to be a veterinarian part of the time too. So enough about that, but I just want to give you what my background and kind of where I come from in the industry. But today I'm charged with the challenge of representing the Livestock Marketing Association and the member markets around the country. The livestock markets, Well, I hope I did that right. Yeah, there we go. Livestock markets, in very rough terms, handle about 31 million head of cattle, 7 million head of hogs, and 3 million head of sheep and lambs annually. In very round numbers, accounts for about $40 billion worth of our customers' livestock, and I will tell you that you don't earn the trust of a producer's to handle $40 billion worth of their livestock without putting some blood and sweat out on the line. And so I'm going to use we a lot because I still consider myself a market owner, but I'm representing these groups of guys here and these ladies back at this table who own these markets, and I'm going to include myself in that group. But those folks have earned that trust of those people. And so when we're here today, we're not just representing the interest of the livestock markets, but we're here to represent the producer as well. And one thing in this room that has bothered me a little bit today, I understand the need that highly educated and scientific people need to make a certain amount of the decisions that go into moving forward with a program like this. But we're making decisions for hundreds of thousands of producers out there, and it bothers me a little bit that there isn't more producer input in this room. So I think we have a great responsibility to make sure that the decisions we're making are on behalf of the producers, because it's a responsibility they've given us, and we shouldn't take it lightly. Just a little map of where the 800 LMA members are, the red dots there on the left. That cobweb on the right is a compilation of cattle movement based on the sampling of the ICVI data. And what it illustrates to me is the fact that what we've talked about, I mean, we're moving these things around a lot. And being a veterinarian out in the field, being a livestock dealer who buys and sells through markets, but also buys and sells out of the country, and sets in 3 or 4 auctions a week. And I can tell you that the data we're capturing is a tiny, tiny portion, really, of the cattle that are moving. I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of animals moving without any paperwork at all. And whether we want to admit it or not, it's the truth. What's the market's role in identification? What has the market been charged with and responsibility? ADT regulates persons responsible for covered animals moving across state lines. It's very fact specific. Typically, that would be the owner of the livestock, and it's been talked about earlier that when those cattle or any livestock are going to leave the market, that the market certainly may not know where those cattle may be headed. In many cases, the dealer or the purchaser of those cattle, they honestly don't know either. Those cattle are being put on trucks and headed west, and the truck's supposed to call us in a little bit. So that right there is an issue we have to address. If that ICVI is supposed to be in that vehicle at all the time when those cattle are moving, some things have to change, because many times those cattle are 5, 6, 7 hours down the road before a destination is actually determined. Markets can work with their customers on compliance and education, but I want to emphasize the fact that ultimately these are USDA responsibilities. The markets have been given some of that responsibility by default, but nothing in the rules says that the livestock markets are in charge of compliance for those people. What it says is that of the information that is gathered up, the information that we're given on that movement, we're charged with the responsibility of storing and holding on to that information for 5 years and making it readily available to state and federal regulatory people whenever they need that information. And I think for the most part we do, and we do a good job with it. But as far as getting out there and regulating whether or not somebody left without the proper documentation, if you've been around a market in the 3 or 4 hours after the sale's over, as the owner of a market, there's a lot of things going on. There's still a lot of moving parts. When the sale's over, the sale's not over. You've got headcount discrepancies. You've got people that found an unmerchantable on their group, and those are all things that the market owner is having to take care of. They're needing to put out those fires, and they certainly can't have a role or take the role of making sure that when that truck pulls out of the parking lot that they've got all the documentation. So I think we should certainly consider that as we move forward. Bottom line on identification, differing opinions about if tagging requirements should be on form, point of first commingling, or when they move across the straight lines. And I think it's been identified that there's, probably more producer support. Producer support is reduced more if we try to go to on-farm. Many of these people, the market has identified that they can add value to their animals through castration, dehorning, administering vaccines, doing things to add value to their animals, and even with that being said, they're not doing that. So if we go to trying to enforce having them put a tag in, it's certainly going to have to be some market incentive there, and I think we all know that, but we just want to remind you all as market owners that is very important. Here's one of those topics we talked about earlier, the incurred costs when it comes to identifying animals, and especially if we consider going to the second phase and identifying things. This thing's ready for me to be done. It wants to keep going. So, but I just want to reiterate that the costs are real. The labor of handling animals extra, shrink, risk of injury not only to livestock but to humans as well. Wear and tear on our facilities, slowing down the speed of the sale. It completely changes our industry, and so don't take lightly the fact that those costs exist and that they're going to be incurred by somebody, because they're all real and they're there. On the topic of enforcement, we really believe that consistency in enforcement is going to be very key. One of the problems or the holdbacks we've had as the program has come along, the markets are an easy target, and we talked about that this morning. It's easy for regulatory people to come in and say, where's the documentation on the movement of those animals? When right outside our window or across the street 2 miles, there's country deliveries taking place every day. Those people are circumventing the market, not paying us a fee for service and their handling, and they're moving animals without any documentation at all. And most of you state veterinarians and regulatory people don't have the resources and the ability to go consistently enforce that, and so I think that consideration should be kept in the forefront.
Hey, what's their names?
I'll get you some afterwards. I'm ready to eliminate the competition myself. but it's not a joking matter, but it happens, and part of it comes with some of the inconsistencies in the states themselves, the import requirements. Some states are a lot more critical about documentation in and out, and people have they've recognized that, and they've figured it out, and they've taken advantage of it. I don't have the answer to solving that problem, but it exists. It's out there. The purpose of ADT is another topic that we think should be brought up again. We strongly believe that APHIS should continue to focus on their mission area of disease traceability and animal health. Certainly believe that trade implications are a separate subject, and they should be kept that way. We would like for producer voluntary programs that are market driven to be the programs that are out there to enhance our foreign markets, and that this rule, the title, Animal Disease Traceability, we should stick with that. It's how it started out, and we strongly believe that that's the course we should stay on. So what are the next steps? One person early this morning made the comment that they thought we were there with education, but several folks since have talked about the fact that education probably is one of our major shortfalls, and I'll definitely be one of those. We've had slides up here today showing that 50 to 60% of the people are even aware that any program exists, or would know what it's intended to do, what the purpose of it is. Our producers should at least have that tool in their chest. If we're out here trying to implement a program that regulates their industry, we're obligated to make sure that whatever it takes, that they're educated in what it's trying to accomplish. We had some discussion from the tag people that they don't want to have 840 tags because they don't want to give a premise ID. It would be my opinion, this isn't LMA talking, this is me. I think the only reason why they truly wouldn't want to have a premise ID is because they don't understand what the potential liabilities or who's going to have that information. Maybe it doesn't have to be called premise ID. Maybe it simply is the postal code or something else. But it's just misinformation, in my opinion, that is keeping us from having buy-in from the producer. We've talked about consistency of enforcement in the country. We've talked about retiring tags at slaughter. All those things are very important. And I'll just wrap up with saying once again that the livestock markets, nowhere in this rule were the livestock markets charged with the duty of compliance, charged with being a facilitator of the information and holding our customers' information until it's needed to trace down a disease outbreak. And certainly it's my opinion that no program, no matter how in-depth it wants to be, can be successful without buy-in from the producer, the folks that are raising these cattle. And so before we get to the end, let's get those folks back into the room and make sure that their input is being considered as well. So, and I guess we're going to do questions at the end, so thank you all very much.
I'm Keith Roehr. I'm a Colorado State Veterinarian. I've been asked to speak on interoperability or sharing of data and other technology. If Colorado's been successful in this regard, it's primarily because we have we have an industry that's been very forward-thinking and I think very conducive to what we've done in our state. The other thing that I'd mentioned, we've had great collaboration between states, particularly with our neighboring states and partners. And then last, our group of people that's over here at our table, we have a lot of people that are very innovative and smart that have helped us advance in a meaningful way. So in that, I'm going to be brief. What capability is needed today? What is the data that we're talking about? What's interoperability? I had another state animal health official share with me. He said, what in the world is that? And it is complicated. But I'll try to touch on that. And then last, what do the different entities, USDA, states, and producers, what do we need to move ahead? Not necessarily with traceability overall, but mostly about this movement of data. So this picture you've already seen is a famous picture by now. Again, these are the stacks of CBIs for 1 year outside of my office. And then over to the left is real life. We're looking for piroplasmosis horses from Texas, 6 counties. We were able to reduce all those boxes down to a stack about like this. But the other thing I realized, if we were looking for cattle from those states, we go from about 8 boxes down to 4. Now if you try to scrutinize that data, you're done in a meaningful manner. So it was an eye-opening situation for us. I think part of the good news, the tools that we have today, we didn't have 5 years ago, not at least in the mature system they're in. So these electronic certificates of veterinary inspection, I think the key thing to know, they move data. They're not just moving an image, they're moving data, the required fields on certificates. So we're not key punching information in, we're just taking a flow of information that's been incredibly helpful to us. So what that looks like, we can use that information, we can actually use it in disease traces and query information. I had another state animal health official ask me when he saw this picture, so what? What does that mean? And I pointed to a dot in his state. This is movement of livestock into Denver in January. What happens in Denver in January? It's a National Western Stock Show. I said, if we had a disease outbreak, would you like to know what was coming back to your state? And it was bingo. They got it. Do you have venues in your state that are similar? And I think we do. We have, every state has big livestock events where we really need data real time. So we talk about business continuity and the speed of business. For us, in an animal health outbreak, we need information in a timely manner, and if we don't, it ends up costing our producers in ineffectual disease response. And I think the public expects, too, that our food system would have the same safeties that they see in other technology that's common about. I understand it's more challenging. So this is a real-life picture of what we were in earlier this year. We had 105 cows from an infected TB herd in South Dakota. And this is real life. This is where these cattle moved within the state. So I think the key is, it isn't that our animal health database, USA Herds, can get with AgConnect and create a map. The map's kind of a nice visual tool, but the reality is a lot of that data that we had was there, and then when we went forth from there, we found other data that we incorporate into that system. So it's the means by which we do business. In your office, you can either do business with paper, or you can try to have interoperability. So there's a lot of hurdles. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but different animal health databases, different challenges, and I think we've done a lot without rules being changed or mandatory requirements to try to tackle some of these problems. So what do we need? And this is an oversimplification, but we need to know location information. If you don't know where livestock start or where they move in a destination, you're challenged. The certificates of veterinary inspection, or CVIs, they're huge. We've had them for decades. We're better at managing that information instead of throwing it in a box. Brand movements in brand states, great intrastate information that's valuable. And then the other thing that we haven't talked much about is our diagnostic laboratories. That's the third leg of the stool that's incredibly important to us, and having the ability to get that information in a timely manner is important. So interoperability, USA Herds, the USDA's instance of traceability information, SCS, and then state-built systems. Those are the places where CVI data is held in the states. We possess that information, or we have it. Whether we own it is another topic. But that information has to comport with EMRS, that's the Emergency Management Response System, AIN, the Animal ID database, Global Vet Link, USDA's Health Certificate, the VSPS, and Scrapey. A lot of that information is silos. The reality is you can't pack all this into one database. You have to be fluent in a number of different languages to be able to do business today as a state animal health official. So interoperability is achieved not when you dump data between these databases. That's not what we're doing. We're just being able to know the language and be able to communicate and pull data where we need it in the event of animal health situations. It's also achieved when you accomplish this without keystrokes. We're not punching information into databases one keystroke at a time. And then the last part that's been incredibly valuable is we've trained the veterinarians to use electronic CVIs and official ID. In Colorado, 55 or more % of our export CVIs are electronic. We don't do any data entry, and we get that data into our animal health database. Last, I'll just sum up. These are my own ponderings, and this isn't like, again, this isn't necessarily traceability. Why it improves that. What are the different means by which we can move ahead with existing regulations without adopting new rules? USDA, if we have a means to move electronic CVI data into the SCS instance directly with no workarounds, states are doing that today with either USAHA herds or with home-built state systems. The integration of USDA databases so they can flow information, and an example of that is with the emergency response system, a means of moving data between the systems. Allowing data, we're doing this right now, we're looking at our information that we have in the South Dakota TB trace, and just that data set, how can we move that in without using spreadsheets and other information? And then last, creating pathways for migration out of animal ID data using MIMS, Mobile Information Management System, and other existing means between databases. Again, these are not data dumps. It's using specified information that we're already using. States, this is to my fellow state animal health officials, CVI data into a manageable system, retrievable system, and you have to be able to use that data in a dynamic way. And that, kudos again to my staff, because they've learned ways to be innovative and pull information that we need in a real-time way. And it means no paper. You can't be going pawing through paper to find information that you need. It needs to be dynamic, it needs to be robust. And then last, what I said earlier in a comment, we need to work with our livestock producers to get means that are reasonable to protect data or give the ability to share it when we need to, so that we protect producers, but we still have the ability to do business. Last is producers, and I pulled this from a USAHA e-news update. This was a quote from a producer, but they were saying we do health papers, we do bills of sales, we do brand inspections, herd and lot loads, and we do all that other stuff, and they're required to do that today. And their comment is we need to move this discussion beyond ear tags and talk about traceability and accurate disease tracebacks and effective record keeping, affordable technology. I could not agree more. But that at the same time, their IDing of livestock with official ID is incredibly important. So they're not mutually exclusive discussions. In other words, we don't ignore one and do the other, and ear tagging is incredibly important. If it could be done close to the birth location, all the better. And then this one tag for all purposes. Terry, you guys were the ones that coined that term with Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and that's what you told us, is we want one tag that works for management and gives us different options that is usable for interstate movement and other situations. And I think y'all were exactly right with that movement. So thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dustin Oedekoven, State Veterinarian in South Dakota. And John, do you have some slides for me here? Okay. I just threw together some slides. Katie asked me to speak on perspective of brand state considerations, and I declined, and somehow I'm still standing here. So I'm not sure how that worked. But so I did throw together some slides to help illustrate some points, I think. And partly what I want to one of the points I want to make is that a lot of the discussion we've had here today, when there's differences of opinions, I think it reminds me that we all come from different backgrounds and different different perspectives, and how we relate to our own situation is how we view the problems, and the solutions that we come up with often are based on the solutions that we're familiar with. And so I guess while we're waiting for some slides to come up, I'll just describe the picture. I was raised in South Dakota, so it's one of the nice things about being state veterinarian in South Dakota. I'm from there. I know a lot of the people, and I enjoy working with folks there. I went to vet school in Iowa, so I have some, a picture of Iowa is you've got rows and rows of cornfield, and there's a gravel road every section line, and you pretty much can't get lost. You go north and south and east and west, and you really can't get too lost in Iowa. And you got hog farms on the corners, and maybe a egg layer over here, and you got feedlots, and so that's the landscape of Iowa. And then I practiced in Wyoming, and you've got big open spaces out there, grazing allotments that are large fenced areas, open range, that sort of thing. And so, the perspectives in being in those two different places are very diverse. So it brings me to this picture, which I'm sure many of you have seen, but if you haven't, it's good to consider, is that here's a bunch of blind people who are giving their interpretation of how they see this elephant. And you got the guy on top saying it's a fan. And the guy out front here holding the tusk says it's a spear. Down here it's a snake. Over here it's a tree. Up here it's a wall. And over here it's a rope. And each of these folks would be equally, wrong. Yeah, probably wrong. Yeah, it's an elephant. Yeah. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So they're all wrong, and yet, they will argue their point fervently because that's what they perceive. So, and South Dakota sits right kind of in between Wyoming and Iowa, and so we see that transition from the open range lands. We've got a lot of bison in our state, a lot of open grazing lands out there. Some slides I stole off the internet, so I credit the interweb on this. Here's we got a big river rolls through the middle of the state. Here's me and my crew enjoying some of that on 4th of July. So our tourist folks like to say we have more coastline than California if you measure the east and the west banks of the Missouri River that kind of cuts through there. I don't know if that's true, but we got plenty of water to play in. So. And then as you get further east, we're back into more like Iowa cornfields, okay? And so the point in illustrating this, other than to show you a little bit what it's like back home, is that here's our situation when it comes to brand inspection in South Dakota. And out west, everybody likes to make sure we've got the government's okay to move animals out of that inspection area, come and inspect the brands, make sure that we own these before we move them out. And that has a valuable and historic purpose of preventing theft, locating lost animals, getting them back to their owners, and they operate, with the security of that structure in place. But just across the Missouri River, they don't need that structure, and and I sit right here. In fact, my office is right on the dividing line between Eastern Time and Mountain Standard Time. Half my staff is in West River Time and half's in East River Time, and everything's. We really should have been East Dakota and West Dakota. I'm not sure who drew that parallel line. It makes much more sense to go east and west. But anyway, so with that explanation I gave Katie as to why I shouldn't speak on this topic, she said, no, you're perfect, because you see it in a couple different methods and ways here. So with that, I got to log back in my screen here, sorry. I wanted to kind of talk about how we see some of these differences here. So in the West, branding is, and I apologize for those of you from brand areas. I'm going to get a little basic here, but I think it's important to the folks that are feeling the tail of the elephant to describe what's happening on the trunk of the elephant. Okay, so out west here, branding is not required. Not everybody brands, even if you have a brand. I grew up out here in Meade County, and I have a brand, and we grew up branding, and still do, and it has its need, but you don't have to brand your livestock, but what is required is the ownership inspection, and so that has a valuable place there in preventing theft and recovering lost animals. So branding is a practice with a rich heritage in the West, in a lot of the Western states. In fact, the branding event is so much of a social event, a social gathering, and kind of a heritage type gathering as it is a form of identifying animals. I've got a brother-in-law that's kind of lost sight of that. He just makes sure he hits about 27 brandings in a row. I'm not sure how he gets anything done. He doesn't get anything done, but anyway, he goes to brandings and has a really good time at it. So it's a good social event. At any rate, and that's why folks are that are familiar with that practice are really tied to it, because it has a heritage associated with it. So, but there are some limitations on the brand, and I think, I think some of the limitations on the usefulness of brands and brand inspection for animal health purposes are at least twofold. I'm sure you can come up with others, but one of the main concerns I have is it's not a health inspection. And I'm afraid as we get into these discussions that we're having about all the technological details and enforcement and which tags and are we going high frequency or low frequency and what have you, and all these other discussions we're having on pins and lids and these type of things, we kind of lose sight of the fact that where this all started was in the need to have inspection of health for animals. And so the brand inspection doesn't accomplish that. South Dakota isn't a very old state, especially compared to the states out east, but our brand laws go back to territorial times, pre-statehood, and our animal health laws do too. And for those of you that are interested in historical context of disease control programs, I'd recommend a book called Arresting Contagion, and kind of goes through some of the historical disease control events and how they popped up. And our state came along after a lot of those programs came along, but it might help us refocus on what we're doing here with these health inspections. So from the perspective of an animal health official, I want an animal health professional to assure that the animals coming into our state are free of signs of contagious infectious disease. That's what it's about. So, and that's for the animals coming into the state. The brand inspection is really done on animals that are leaving a brand inspection area. Again, whether they leave just the area that they're in, the county, or they leave the state, or they go across the river. Okay, so I think there's some valuable information there. It can be used for disease investigation purposes, but it doesn't replace the health inspection that that this is all designed around. So move along quickly. I think the second major limitations is that it's not an individual identification. And again, that can be okay in some contexts, but it doesn't allow for specific temporal relationship of those animals, branded animals, within a larger group of animals. And I could give you all kinds of descriptions and explanations where we run into that. Most recently with our TB investigation, where we've had, I'll give you some of the pros where the brand has been helpful, but also some limitations, and actually magnify the amount of work that we had to do because we diluted branded animals within groups of other branded animals, and it was, the trace forward on that is not as clear as we would like it to be. So again, I guess going back to this picture of the elephant and everybody who's looking at it, the ways in which different forms of animal ID, including brands, are used depends on your frame of reference. And I'll just quickly, it might depend on whether you're a producer, veterinarian, yard employee at a livestock market, regulatory official, diagnostician. Everybody has their own frame of reference as to what that animal ID means. It might also depend on your geography and what the local customs are there. Do you brand or do you not? Do you just put ear tags in? What's the local flavor? It also, I think, depends on the disease that we're talking about. And I think from my point of view, when we talk about animal disease traceability in broad terms, and if we get down to just the cattle industry, I kind of think there's only maybe 2 or 3 diseases we really care to trace at this point. And I know we could have a discussion on that, but TB, in which case, we're relying on finding that granuloma at slaughter and properly associating it with an ID. And the brands are nowhere to be found by the time that granuloma is found. So we need that official ID to get back to the trace back. The brand's in the truck and it's gone, and we don't know where it is when we're looking at that granuloma and trying to tie it back to a herd of origin. So once we get to that herd of origin, the brand may have some application, but as far as a trace back, it doesn't help that much. Brucellosis, on the other hand, those animals are typically found more on like a herd test. Infected animals might be found on a pre-movement test, and in that instance, a brand can be very helpful. So that's happening in and around the greater Yellowstone area, not much else in the country where those change of ownership tests are identifying possibly Brucella-infected animals, and then the brand inspection records can sure be helpful there. So again, it's a geographic and a different disease. And then I threw in trick, which maybe not, but I cringe when I get a lab report that's trick positive for a bull with just a name like Widowmaker or Tiny or something like that. How are we going to get back to that bull? Which bull is it when we show up at the ranch? We don't, is it all the bulls that are branded like that one is, or are there other animals in there that are of risk? The brand really doesn't have much application in my mind when it comes down to trick and investigating those. So those are kind of the 3 things. And again, that's my perspective. You guys might have others too that you'd add to that, but the point I wanted to make is it does depend on the documentation that you use, depends on what you're doing, and in many cases the brand can be very useful, even though it, in my mind, won't replace or it's primarily an ownership ID, and we still need ID for animal health. In our recent TB investigation, I'll wrap this up real quick. Our recent TB investigation, we did use the brand in many cases. We had heifer calves that left the index herd of origin and they went off to feedlots and then later somehow turned into breeding animals, and you guys know how that works. And some of them got identified 2 and 3 and 4 owners later with an official ID, and it was not the brand records that got us to those traces, it was sales records. And once we went through the sales process, we'd hand either the herd owner or the state veterinarian in that state the brands and say, well, sales records indicate that they went into this herd. Here's the brand we're looking for. And in many cases, animals with that brand were found and they were eligible for federal indemnity and helped complete that TB trace. So we do find usefulness in those, and I think it's important to, continue to value that the brand does have some value there, although it's, not a replacement for animal health certificates of veterinary inspection. So, all right. As classic, I've talked longer than I should and didn't leave the gentleman from Montana much time.
No, that's worked out real well. Most of what I should have covered, then you covered. So I really want to cover just talk about that example that Dusty talked about. So if you can go to the next slide, or do I have a power here? Or I do. Okay, so this is the trace, or one of the many traces that we were involved in as far as the tuberculosis investigation from our good friend in South Dakota. Pretty much what I want to illustrate here is that, again, the various movements that took place, the lack of documentation for those movements, aside from ownership and purchase and records, sale records, and then really how we really took advantage of the brand information when we, to the advantage of that producer that purchased those animals when we finally traced those animals. So anyways, this involves 53 heifers from the affected herd. So this is the South Dakota affected herd. These 53 heifers were purchased by an individual that assembled the group or those animals into a group of about 550. Those animals were then bangs vaccinated on the second premises. So keep in mind, then we have no idea which animals received what tags or where those what the origin of those animals were that were bangs vaccinated, because they were compiled and they were they had no IDs at this point. So this is their first official identification. At this point, they were sold, I think 3, maybe 4 times. They were recompiled. They were bred. At that point, they went interstate on a health certificate. They were mixed. 46 of these animals were mixed into a larger group in Wyoming. And then 88 head from those were shipped to Montana. So we have, easily 5, at least, I would say 6 change of ownerships, recommingling, reassembling before their arrival on the premises. Where this is relevant is in a couple ways. Number one is we talked about the holes in traceability. We talked about the fact that when in-state movements take place, we have no idea where those animals go, and only through release in brand states, through those change of ownership or sales records and brand inspections, do we really have one leg up as far as being able to have a repository of that sale information. Let me see if I can, that's just health certificate information. So this is really where the rubber meets the road, or the piece of information that really helped us figure out what animals actually made it to the Montana premises. So the question that we have to ask is, were animals from the index herd, from the affected index herd in South Dakota, were those animals did they make it through all those change of ownerships, and did any of those animals from that index premises wind up in Montana? And we were because the identification did not take place on the premises of origin, we have no idea through identification or through those sale records to find out, to answer that question. So the question the reason that's relevant for that producer is, if he received animals from the South Dakota herd, then that means that all of his animals on that herd, on that home herd, are exposed to the index herd animals, right? Let me say that again. If the South Dakota affected herd animals are wound their way up through those change of ownerships and are standing in the state of Montana, then all of the rest of the herd are exposed to those South Dakota index herd animals. If he got animals that were just commingled with the South Dakota index animals, then we just have exposed, then Montana's herd only has exposed animals that were exposed to the South Dakota index animals. It's a little bit of a challenge, but bear with me here. The reason that's relevant is because if the herd in Montana has the index animals, then the entire herd has to be tested for tuberculosis. All 550 animals have to be tested for tuberculosis if they got exposed to the South Dakota index animals. However, if they're just in contact with animals that were in contact with the South Dakota animals, then we only need to test the 14 that they received. And so the way that we were able to kind of unpeel that onion, or peel that onion, was we were able to find the ownership records, and the 27 animals that went to the Montana premises were no brand animals. And so we knew, because of the history of the index herd, that they religiously branded all of the animals that left that premises. And the animals that came to Montana, to this Montana herd, did not lacked a brand. We knew that none of the index animals actually made it to the Montana premises, and therefore this individual in a drought year, with poor water, with fires, etc., only had to test 14 animals out of his herd of 550. So I guess my main point is that we are able to leverage. I need to make definitely an acknowledgement. Dr. Tani Szymanski, our Assistant State Veterinarian, but a lot of the work on the EPI that was super convoluted, the credit goes to Dr. Barbara Kaiser out of Wyoming and USDA. What I want to say is, brands are going to remain important. They're going to be critical for change of ownership. As long as we run animals on pastures that are measured in sections, so square miles rather than acres, we are going to continue to have to rely on brands for ownership. Brands will continue to be able to help us fill the gaps in our traceability system. And I think that to suggest, or there are folks that are from brand states and folks that are advocating the use of a strong brand system. Some of those folks have expressed concern that a strong traceability system somehow threatens the culture that Dr. Oedekoven mentioned, or the institution, the legacy, and the usefulness of brands for theft and ownership. And I will just say that both systems have a strong need in Western states. Neither one of them threatens the other, and in fact, they strengthen the other, because we take at least a call a week from our brands enforcement folks to find out to who an ID belongs to, or to who, or to what veterinarian it was issued to help with ownership complaints or ownership issues. Tags can always be cut out. Brands are permanent, and therefore there is a strong, I think, a continued strong need for brands systems in Western states where the animals may be unsupervised on large expanses of land for an extended period. That's what I have.
Hey, how y'all doing? Thank you to the leadership of NIAA and USAHA for putting this together and for including me. I'm Tony Frazier. I'm from Duluth, Minnesota. No, just kidding. I'm the state veterinarian from Alabama. If you need an interpreter, see this young lady right down here from Florida. She could probably help me out a little bit. And I'm the last one on this panel to speak. What about that? So I've only got a few slides, and I'm going to get them in if it takes me the rest of the day. Y'all with me on that? Y'all going to be here till I get done. See, if you need an interpreter, see this young lady right up here. I saw an advertisement for a particular company that was selling paint that you paint with. And their advertisement slogan was, start with a good finish. It took me for a little while to figure out what they were saying, but they were talking about starting your painting job with a product to give you a good finish. So y'all with me? You with me? Come on now. If you're on solitary on your phone, put it down right now. Please pay attention. Charlie, that's your paper. Look right here. So I just wanted to start a few comments about, if you look on your thing right here, it says that I'm supposed to be talking about alternative movement documents. And we're going to start with a good finish by saying all of this that we've done is about getting animals properly and officially identified in a way that we can trace those, should we need to, industry, from a state and federal regulatory standpoint, because I've dealt with some animals that we could not trace, as mentioned earlier, for something called BSE, not atypical BSE. So I'm putting 840 tags in some cattle in the only federally recognized Native American tribe in Alabama. That was a great opportunity right there. We put some tags in there. So overall, this is what we're going to focus on. We're going to come together with this. This has been our general purpose, is that we want to be able to trace and recover from disease and respond to disease outbreaks in livestock. Okay, now one commercial, watch my time. In Alabama, that's one word. In Alabama, we have a state rule that is very similar, or it mirrors the federal ADT rule. It's a change of ownership rule, okay? So we have that in place in our state. So just from a commercial standpoint, we think we're moving forward, and we do have indoor plumbing and electricity and some roads paved. Now, I want to talk to you, talk to you a little bit about alternative movement documents. I wish I could move around off of this thing, but I got to stay still. Now listen to me. Not ownership or statements. That's not what I'm going to talk about. Not ownership or statements. Thank you very much. He corrected me. We're talking about alternative movement documents. Are y'all with me? Now, most of those documents are going to be either produced or could be produced at the livestock market. Most of those. So we're struggling with that the last few years. We want to look for ways to partner with those markets and not cause them more problems. They got enough problems as it is. Our participant down here is veterinarian and own stockyard, whatever. So we appreciate that, but we want to enhance their ability to get us what we need in a timely fashion. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we can either pay them or we can work with them and develop some ideas. And here's what we did a few years ago. And where's Dr. Charlie brought us? Where you get Charlie? And in Virginia, and his predecessor, Dr. Richard Wilkes, we were talking about this at the East folks, and we kind of came up this, and Dr. Wilkes and I think Charlie did most of the heavy lifting. This is just the first part of an MOU that they put together. And you can go on, you can talk to Charlie if you'd like, and he can give you a copy of this. It's a small nominal fee, I think. Anyway. But it goes on, it talks about developing an MOU with some states that would allow the movement of certain cattle, that were with all the appropriate information about those cattle, on their invoice, from the market, produced by the market, and within those, following this document, several states had already signed on 2013, right? We did this back in 2013, so that has already been done. And so the states that signed on, there is a potential. It's not that everybody's doing it, but there is a potential for us to look for some way for the markets to maybe create another page or whatever on the invoice product, maybe. And some of your states may not accept that. We understand. But this was an effort several years ago to try to answer this issue. So I'll just show you that very briefly. That's a living, breathing document, but I'm sure you can get a copy of that again if you would like. So beyond that, what else are we doing? This is Southeast, and I'm representing the Southeast and the other states, Southern Mafia. I mean states that are here. The South will rise again, guys. Right? What else could we do? And some other states have put together some really novel ideas. Florida's got a great document, and Stephen, I couldn't find the document that Florida has that's being used at their markets. Apologize for that, but they do have a market. A document that's used at the market that animals can potentially move to other states that approve that. But here's one. Was created by the state of Georgia. Dr. Cobb and Dan Duncan sitting right over here, and they can help you again if you got this thing. I know y'all not going to believe this, but I got this thing called a smartphone. If you want to take it out, take a picture of it right now, feel free to do so. I see y'all doing that anyway. Take you a picture of that if you'd like, or I'm not going to go down through the elements of that, but you can see this is not a health certificate. It's not an ownership or statement. It is an alternative movement document that animals we propose that potentially, and it may not work in every case, but if the state of Alabama and the state of Georgia agrees to this, these are animals that can move, appropriate animals that can move out of their stockyard to the state of Alabama, should we choose, or Florida, and those animals will be listed on there with all the information that I need, and it can be done, electronically. That nice word called electronically, okay? So take a look at that. That's rolled out just this past year, I believe, Dr. Cobb, is that right? Okay, so this is one attempt to meet that need. Let me pause right here for the parentheses and say, I guess I should have said at the beginning when I discussed the MOU. Now, I know we find this hard to believe that we in the Southeast there's some veterinarians that don't want to stay at a stockyard. I know it's hard to believe. Listen, if we can find one that'll fog up a mirror, that's supposed to be funny. They got student loans to pay for, folks. They got to go on and do some more stuff than stay. And I apologize, but most of our states in the Southeast do not, by statute or rule, require a veterinarian to stay there the entire time. What they do say is a state or federal or accredited veterinarian must be at the stockyard. Are y'all with me? And hadn't seceded from the union again. We're still with y'all. We learned our lesson. So we still in there. We want all that to go on, but in reality, the veterinarians are just not going to stay there the entire time of the market. I'm sorry, they ain't going to do it. Okay? Again, they got to go spay some cats. They got a dog with a hemorrhoids or something's going on, and they got to move on. Okay? Listen, this is a true story. I'm not making this up. You can't make this up. I was at one of the largest stockyards in Alabama last week. And I happened to be visiting. They come looking for me in the AHT. Where's the veterinarian? He's gone and been gone. We can't get him. He's been gone. Okay? Well, there's a cow that we want to get a BSC sample. I know a little bit about BSC, folks. I've seen two of them. All right? All right? So we can't find the veterinarian to do some of that good accredited work. Now, no need to ask him for a health certificate. His butt's gone. Y'all with me? Okay? So if an animal had need to move to Georgia, Dr. Cobb, from that market, there was no veterinarian there, or Dr. Paul to Wisconsin, I can't imagine that happening, but there was no veterinarian there to write the health certificate for them. Y'all with me? If they got to have it, they got to have it. So this is all an attempt to potentially not go around the need for a veterinarian. If you want that, if you wanted to come to Iowa, got to have South Dakota or West Dakota or East Dakota, whatever it is. You want that health certificate, you'll get it maybe, But in those true situations, Dr. Forshee, when we've got stockyards where veterinarians they're just not going to stay there. Okay, they can't. They're gone. And so this is an attempt, both the potential invoice, this document from Georgia, and I will show you the one that we have started several years ago in Alabama. It should look familiar to some of y'all that really, it looks a lot like the Colorado-Kansas CVI. Are y'all with me on that, Keith? Dr. Roehr, where are you at? So thank you very much. Yeah, oh, there you are.
He spoke an hour ago.
Yeah. He's doing what?
I say he spoke an hour ago.
Oh, was that him? Was that I thought that was a mighty soft-spoken guy. We copied, absolutely. We took what the Colorado-Kansas CVI, and we talked to those guys that are really, really smart, and our IT folks, and we just stole everything we could from them and created this same sort of document. We're not completely done with it. I'm going to tell you, we kind of stopped using it because we didn't have a database management system that could handle it at the time when we stole it from them. But now we do. Again, I told y'all we've got electricity and paved roads in Alabama now, so we've got this thing called USAHA herds. And what we want to be able to do is not only provide that to your state, Dr. Roehr, if these animals were to move to where is it, Colorado? We want to provide that to you in a format that you can use that electronically. Does it move data? It does move data. So it is exactly like what you have. Your system should be able to see this right off as data that it can capture. We want, and so this is just something that we're going to offer to our markets. Now, when we visited with the markets about it, they just said, "Hey, can y'all put that in an Excel spreadsheet?" I don't know what that means. XML, DWDI, something. I don't know. Excel, what? Okay, yeah, we can get it. I just said, yeah. Can you put this in an Excel spreadsheet? I said, you dang gum right, we can. I don't know what that means, but we've got this is another attempt, and you can't go. I think Dr. Roehr will point this out. You can't go forward in this document. Those red blocks that y'all see up there mean something. So if you don't put that data in there, you can't go forward. But we want the potentially. If Georgia would accept it, or Mississippi, they're not here, Mississippi's not here to this meeting, but potentially if they would accept this document, then it would be data, potentially, maybe, that their system would recognize and use electronically. So that is not a certificate of veterinary inspection. Y'all look down there, do you see where it says signature? You see at the bottom over there? Right here. Hey, look right here. It says signature, not veterinarian. It's just, again, if you're the shipper, you're the owner, you're the buyer, the agent, sign your name right there, okay? Then the market potentially could hit, and on the Georgia document as well, could hit send. It's going to come to me. We forward it to you, whatever, okay? That's at least the plan. So we understand that if you're going to create a movement document, alternative movement document, and it's on a piece of paper, or as Thatch brought out to me, if it's on a PDF, thing, I just tell you, we just don't want it. We don't want another piece of paper. We want that thing electronically if at all possible. We appreciate that. And these are just a few thoughts from the southern states. We're trying to develop it. Now, again, don't want to commit state veterinarian blasphemy, that we would prefer all animals move on a certificate of veterinary inspection, but oftentimes think about exactly what you may be getting. This stockyard I was telling you about that where I was at last week, if that veterinarian fills out you a health certificate, I guarantee you you can't read it. I'll buy you a Coca-Cola if you can read it. Okay, you can't read it. So this is what we're out to do, and I see it's time to close. But this right here, tattoo. What is the national obsession with tattoos? I just got to say this in closing. I don't understand. If you've got one little butterfly somewhere or whatever, I'm okay with that. They're not in this room, but I'm going to say in closing, hey, a tattoo will not fix ugly. Y'all with me?
Let's give our speakers a round of applause, yes. So it is 3:50, and this session gets done at 4. But certainly open for questions. Do we have anyone from the audience to start off with any questions? Right down here in the center.
I'm Deborah Wilson, and I'm from Canada, so I hope you don't hold that against me, but I work for something called the Beef Information Exchange System. So what we are is a web-based data management system that allows different data systems to talk to one another. So I have a couple of questions. Dr. Tony Frazier, so that MOU that you talked about that would allow to add transfer information to a livestock market invoice. Did you talk to the auction markets about having to change their software to accommodate that?
Yes.
And I know you've probably got about 3 or 4 auction market software companies. Where did you go with that?
In Alabama, it did not work.
Okay.
And so I can't speak for other states, but yes, we did think about the software systems and maybe even have software systems present us with what will work. And that certainly can be debated and discussed within that group. I think, Dr. Broadus, that could be discussed. And so you tell us what you can work within your system, and we can just get the data points within there that we need and let it go.
So interestingly enough, another company I work with does auction market software. So we provide auction market software to 30% of the auction markets in the U.S. So that's a very real possibility. And then Dr. Marty Zaluski, you talked about sharing owner or origin information with the brand department. No concern about sharing privacy of producers' information there, or?
That's a great question. The Brands Enforcement Division is in the same department as the Animal Health and Food Safety Division. So
but you're collecting that animal health information for a different purpose.
Correct. I think it would be irresponsible of tax dollars use of being a publicly funded agency and not leveraging information from one side of our department to take advantage and to run the other side more efficiently. I think we'd be opening up ourselves for much greater criticism if we said, well, didn't you know this information was here, just, downstairs?
But interestingly enough, what would producers think if they knew that? You're sharing their information.
So I think that's a great question. I don't mean to minimize it. What I'll say is that we are proud of the fact that our Animal Health and Food Safety Division and the Brands Enforcement Division have a very close working relationship. If it wasn't for the Brands Enforcement field forces, we would be much less successful in enforcement of our animal health regulations. And in fact, we have asked, for instance, our brands enforcement folks that are on the ground, including employees, but also kind of volunteer brand inspectors, to contact our office, the animal health section, when they are issuing a brand certificate for an owner inside our surveillance area for brucellosis to make sure that they're compliant with animal health regulations. So again, I think it makes the department stronger. I think we give producers a better bang for the buck to make sure that their money goes further, that we share that info. And I understand that may be a red flag in some areas, but in our use and our experience, it's been a strength and not a weakness.
Well, I think that's a good argument against your black helicopter.
Got a question up front, right here.
My question would be for Dr. Starks. Let's fast forward to a magical, jubilant, imaginary day in 2020 or 2023, and we've all agreed on some wonderful electronic ID of some sort. and it's mandatory. And my question would be, has LMA, has the livestock, LMA, have you done any cost analysis on what it would take for your markets to be able to process cattle coming off a truck on a scale, getting back on a truck, software, computers, sensors, things like that? Has anyone done any kind of cost analysis as to what it would take for the livestock markets to be able to handle that?
We have not. Our discussions with our markets have been more along the lines of who within your existing facility can even pull that off if they want to. Some are, some are bound within the limitations of the space they have, don't have a place for it's pretty much a consensus. If we're going to receive cattle untagged and have to tag them before they can go through commerce, it's going to take a different receiving facility, change the flow of our markets. And many of our markets say that it's just not even a possibility within their existing facility. Others, quite honestly, look at it as, we'll do it. It'll be a competitive advantage against another market. We're certainly not here to promote any program that gives unfair advantage one way or another to one member over another. And but that is as far as we've gone and haven't done any cost analysis. We have great concerns over, LMA insures a lot of our members. We have great concerns over the effect it has from a human side and an animal side. And our members certainly have concern over the speed of commerce, and but that's all the farther discussion has gone right now.
I think we got over to my left.
I think there's one thing that we in here can all agree on, and the end goal is to sustain longevity within the agricultural industry, and that's the main objective. And how we get there is it's tough, but number one, the producers are the one set of individuals in our whole agricultural realm that are the reason that we're all here today, and they're the reason, if they're gone, that we might not be there here tomorrow. And we haven't heard their names brought up a lot today, but when we start talking dollars and confidentiality of information, whether you're a farmer or you're a banker, I don't think any other person should ever be able to tell somebody where their dollars should go. And to maintain the integrity of everything, the confidentiality part of it, I believe that that's a huge thing that we can never cross in terms of risking that confidentiality with anything. But I think the diagrams, Dr. Frazier, were great, but we're going to all this work. We have all these good people here today to all work to the same end result. But in the instance where a disease outbreak were to happen, and if we were to kind of go off what we all talked about today, the odds of it being an animal that was traded within the country trade, never went to a sale barn, never went to a market, and that was the one that we had to find. All this work, we actually missed it. So how can we completely 100% fulfill what we're trying to get? And it's going to be tough, but I think we all have to remember that 100%, 99% doesn't work. We need 100%. And so I think we all have to keep that in mind.
So from a question standpoint, you're asking deeper to the grassroots area, how do you go below or pre-market location?
Correct.
Right?
Dr. Frazier, I'm just curious, what would be your answer to that?
Well, obviously, to encourage the producer or enable the producer to be aware, understand, what traceability means for us. So if we can't trace the BSE cow, what will be the negative impact for and I'm not talking about brucellosis or TB, I'm just talking about what we've experienced. What will be the potential impact for the producer in that whole area? So that's back to education, is truly educating the producer not as that you got to educate them as a partner in this whole process. And if we don't do that, that's where we'll drop the ball.
That's true. And one other thing is, every time an animal gets loaded onto a trailer, a semi, or whichever it may be, they don't go to a livestock market every time. You know, not every time. So that's where the markets, I mean, we're up for doing everything for the producer and to maintain everything we're talking about. But we also want to make sure that the other piece of it, whether it's 1% or 50%, that we cover that as well.
Dr. Oedekoven?
If I can respond to that or make an observation, and again, I'll go back to my elephant with all the different parts. I know we're in the South too, in the South Dakota, and we're a little different than Alabama down that way, but South Dakota, don't you know? And so we do things differently there. We sell whole crops of calves in one day. And our family's doing that today at an auction market in South Dakota, and we sell it. They go through in big lots through the rings like that, and they're branded and they're weighed. And I know down south you guys do them little smaller groups, right? Different colors
by one,
different ear shapes, different. So it's different, So I'm speaking from my perspective where we're at. We've had, and we're talking about disease traceability. We've had 8 slaughter tracebacks for tuberculosis between 2001 and 2017 that went back to South Dakota, and there were South Dakota investigations. All 8 of those came through an auction market. So this is just my perspective, but in that we found good traceability records in many of those cases, not all of those cases. I will say the recent case we had was an excellent example of all the things that we've been doing. I know I'm talking out in the hall and among different people here, we said, well, gosh, this is the same thing we had when we talked in 2010. We met over at the Renaissance. I pulled out my folder from the NIAA Traceability in 2010 just the other day. And yeah, it seems like we're discussing a lot of the same things. But I will tell you, from my perspective, we are advanced beyond that point because of the things that we've been doing. The health certificates are working. Sorry, I'll speak up. The health certificates are working, the brand inspection working, and the auction market records are really good. Not perfect, okay? And I can give you a lot of examples where we haven't had perfect adherence to the rules. In fact, the animal that we traced back from slaughter, she came from a Nebraska feedlot, and she left the auction market in one of those after-sale trades you were talking about. So there's no certificate from the auction market to the feed yard, but still we had enough traceability, and she had an official ID that we linked back to the feed yard records that the veterinarian had. If I could stay on point with this, is that the records and the involvement of the auction markets is critical in my mind.
And just to cut you off, but just to
thank you.
Actually, to cut you off, the BSE cow, just really quickly, the BSE cow that we've just experienced, in trying to be in compliance with USDA, they want to look at birth cohorts back to 2005, 2006, and 2007. 2005, 6, and 7. And we found movement data from that market, but with no 840 tags. This was all metal ear tags or brucellosis calf hood vaccination tags at that market. We found every one of them. And then we've also been to trace out where they've gone. They're the birth cohorts for 3 years, over 11 years ago, we have found all those records at the market.
Look, guys, I get it, and I'm not going to drag this out, and I don't disagree with any of you. But what does prove that null is how many times the transaction occur outside of a market before they go to the market for the first time. And when the calf or the yearling comes in weighing 900 pounds with no tag in its ear, we put a tag in. That's fine. However, the previous 899 pounds, that thing's a ghost. Now, the livestock market serves a good purpose there as well, but before that, it is truly a ghost. And standardization is such a powerful word, standardization with, the tagging. But however, the standardization before the tag even goes in the ear, I think that's actually more important in terms so everybody, no matter when something happens or it moves or is held to regulation, that we all know exactly what's happening, what's going on.
Well, I know we're running tight on time. Do we have time for one more question? This will be the very last question, because we do, but obviously it's a topic that's very broad and very important as we move forward.
Thank you. Tom Jones from Arkansas. So here as a producer, not a producer and a vet, not a producer and a livestock market owner, just a cow-calf producer. And so, Tim, my question to you is, when we hear about all the issues that the markets have, and we're concerned about everyone, and I respect everyone's concern in this room about how we do this right, but I don't think we have had anyone ask, what are we doing about the small cow-calf producer that cannot stand another classical BSE cow without a traceability system? In Arkansas, the herds are still 23 head on average. Given today's economy, you talk about how marketing is not a part of this. I respect that, but every disease in the country has a marketing aspect. So how do I go back to Arkansas after this meeting and tell the small cow-calf producer that we're any close to protecting them on the next BSE cow? I don't know how to answer that question after today.
Let me ask the question first: does that producer realize that there's a threat out there, and if so, are they willing to take the step to tag those animals before they come into commerce to protect them? So are they willing to take the step to protect themselves?
Over half of them are not aware of that. They weren't aware the first time. They won't be aware this time. Is it not leadership's position to sometimes help people even though they don't know?
And that's why in my opening comments, I sincerely believe that education is where we've fallen way short, and we wouldn't have. This isn't LMA talking. This is Tim Starks. If we educated them on the potential risk that's out there, I don't think it would have to be a mandatory program. I think it could be voluntary. Okay. I may not be on the LMA board anymore. I don't know. But that's a stocker producer, a veterinarian. Family, has raised cattle for a long time. At any point in time, I have enough exposure in the cattle market. If I get caught on the wrong day in one of those, I'm not here anymore. So we're not taking it lightly, but I do think that we're charged with going back to the producer and explaining what their risks are, and letting some of the push for any program come from there, because it's their industry, it's their cow herd, and it's their livelihood. So. Okay.
Well, folks, just to keep things moving, let's thank our panelists again. Thank you very much. Thank you.